ready.
Okay. Sergeants, will you please begin your recordings?
According to the computer, all set.
Okay, Cloud is ready. Okay. Sergeant Keith, you may begin with the opening.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome to the remote hearing on contracts. Will council members and staff please turn on their video at this time? Once again, will council members and staff please turn on their video at this time? Thank you. To minimize disruption, please place all cell phones and electronics to vibrate. You may send your testimony at testimony@council.nyc.gov. That's testimony@council.nyc.gov. Chair, we are ready to begin.
Good morning and welcome to this virtual hearing of the Contracts Committee of the New York City Council. Today is Wednesday, December 16th, 2020. My name is Ben Kallos and I have the privilege of chairing this committee. For those of you who are watching remotely, feel free to participate in this hearing by tweeting me at Ben Kallos. We are joined by Councilmember Perkins and Councilmember Rosenthal. Councilmember Rosenthal is the previous chair of this committee and has been working on some of these issues for quite some time. And out of respect and out of courtesy, because she is chairing a hearing at the very same time, I'd like to turn it to her to talk about her legislation this morning, and then I will continue my opening statement.
Councilmember Kallos, thank you so much. I really appreciate this, and I am going to count on you for pushing this along. I know you will, because I have to shortly give an opening statement on another very important topic. So I'll keep this short. I'm very much looking forward to hearing an update from the administration about PassPort. I'm going to count on Councilmember Kallos, who's going to explain why PassPort is so critically important to nonprofits. And if we can, our nonprofit providers who do the work that the city asks them to do. So when the city asks teachers to work in our public schools, they pay teachers on a regular basis, and there's never a holdup for the principal in terms of that principal getting funding in order to have the teachers be paid. Unfortunately, for our non-profit providers who are doing the exact same service, doing the work that the city has asked them to do, whether it be childcare, taking care of those with disabilities, supportive housing, taking care of the homeless, all of those functions that the city expects these providers to do day in and day out. Unfortunately, because of the process they need to go through to get a contract signed, and then they need to invoice for work that's already been done in order to await getting paid, any slowdown along the way means they are not getting funded for providing those services. It means they have to take out loans from banks that are never repaid by the city. All these additional steps simply to provide homeless services, simply to provide childcare services. So while this may not be the sexiest of topics, it's critical that we get the contract process right. And this administration started a program that is leaps and bounds far ahead of what any other administration did. But it's been 7 years and we need to get it right. So I'm excited to be hearing from the administration about this bill that would require each step of the way for contracting through the PassPort system to be on a clock, to have a time limit, just like we do for ULURP, in order to give developers certainty about their projects. we need to be able to give these providers certainty about when they will be paid, how much they will be paid. And we must do this it's only fair if we're asking them to provide the services that the city needs. So, Chair, I appreciate your working this out with me today, but most importantly, I appreciate your carrying the ball on the Contracts Committee, appreciate your pushing along this bill, pushing along the administration in order for us to get this right for the people doing work on behalf of New York City residents. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your leadership, and good luck with the Women's Committee hearing that you will be leading right now. I'd like to also acknowledge we've been joined by Councilmember Keith Powers. Today we're joined by the Mayor's Office of Contract Services. They've been working with the City Council and city contractors in developing a flagship initiative known as the Procurement and Sourcing Solutions Portal, also known as PassPort, which will be the primary subject of our discussion today. We'll also be discussing Introduction 1627 of 2019, sponsored by former Contracts Chair Helen Rosenthal, in relation to setting time limits for a procurement process, reporting on agency compliance, and developing an online platform for managing procurement. But first, to PassPort. This hearing will provide the committee with a second opportunity to hear publicly from the Mayor's Office of Contract Services regarding the rollout of the PassPort system, how it is being received by the vendor community now that it has matured to its third phase, and what other types of updates we might expect in the future to further improve the procurement experience for city vendors. Before we dive in, I'd like to offer a bit of background on PassPort. PassPort was conceived as an online procurement portal designed to create visibility in city contracting, improve collaboration between agencies and vendors, and facilitate the timely registration of awarded contracts. This PassPort digital interface was designed to allow vendors to track the progress of their particular contracts, offer agencies insight into the capabilities of specific vendors, and allow those agencies to expedite the process of determining vendor responsibility, a critical component for contractors working with the city. The first phase of PassPort was launched back in the summer of 2017 and gave vendors and the council a taste of what we could expect from this new online procurement portal. PassPort's release 1 permitted contractors to file their vendor questionnaires electronically, identify areas for expertise, allowed vendors to review performance evaluations on prior contracts in order to improve their deliverables in the expectation of being awarded future city contracts. PassPort Release 2 was launched in April 2019 and built upon Release 1 by allowing electronic vendor invoicing and the creation of online catalog of vendor goods that vendors could update in real time. Agencies were then able to shop vendor catalogs directly with up-to-date access to inventory. Today's hearing is as much an overview of Release 3 as it is a pat on the back to the Mayor's Office of Contracts for their hard work in pushing through this release against the backdrop of this pandemic. This update could not have come at a better time for city contractors who can sign contract paperwork electronically and, most importantly, track their contract progress online directly through a milestone tracker which outlines steps required to have their award completed. Vendors can now just log into PassPort and see directly where their contracts lie within the contracting process and what remains to be done to complete their contract awards. Vendors can also now search through PassPort for all of the city's active solicitations and see which ones might be able to offer a bid. These updates have been well received by the vendor community, we hope, and we hope to learn more about it. And we also hope to hear more from the Mayor's Office of Contract Services. I think I probably have shared a lot of what we've already learned, but hope to hear it directly from the Mayor's Office of Contracts. I also want to thank our committee counsel, Alex Polinoff, our policy analyst, Leah Skrupiak, finance analyst, Frank Sarno, and finance unit head, John Russell, for all their hard work putting this hearing together. With that said, I will now turn the floor over to my committee counsel to swear in the administration.
Thank you, Chair. Before I swear in the administration, I'm just going to go through some procedural items. Before we begin testimony, I'd just like to remind everyone that you'll be on mute until you've been called upon to testify, at which point you'll be unmuted by the host. We will be calling on panelists to testify individually, so please listen for your name to be called. The first panelist today to give testimony will be the Director of the Mayor's Office of Contract Services, Dan Simon. The Mayor's Office of Contract Services will also have the following people available for questioning. First, Deputy Director Ryan Murray, Deputy Director Ellen Villari, and General Counsel Victor Olds. I will call on each of you shortly when it is time to begin your testimony. During the hearing, if council members would like to ask a question of the administration or of a specific panelist, please use the Zoom raise hand function and we will call on you in order. We will be limiting council member questions to 5 minutes, which includes the time it takes to answer those questions. And please note, for the ease of this virtual hearing, we will not be allowing a second round of questions for each panelist outside of the chair. All hearing participants should submit written testimony to testimony@council.nyc.gov. Before we begin, I will administer the oath to the administration. To all members of the Mayor's Office of Contract Services who will be offering testimony or will be available for questions, please raise your right hands. I will call on you individually for a response. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee today, and to respond honestly to council member questions? Director Simon.
I do.
Thank you. First Deputy Director Murray.
I will.
Deputy Director Villari.
I do.
General Counsel Olds.
I do.
Thank you. Director Simon, you may begin your testimony.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Kallos and members of the Contracts Committee. My name is Dan Simon, and I serve as the Director of the Mayor's Office of Contracts and the city's Chief Procurement Officer. Today, I will provide an update on the Procurement and Sourcing Solutions Portal, PassPort, and our ongoing efforts to transform the city's procurement process. As you know, over the last few years, MOX has evolved to become a procurement services agency while adopting technology to modernize traditional oversight responsibilities. Specifically, we are now organizing ourselves to shepherd agencies through each critical step of the procurement process, from centrally establishing a need for a good or service and releasing solicitations to setting up contracts for vendors and capturing all oversight agency approvals. We have established a common platform for end-to-end collaboration for all key players in the procurement, and with this have entered a new era where true transparency can lead to data-informed improvements to process, more rational administrative policies, and a common experience for vendors across all agencies and industries. Our implementation plans for PassPort have been phased, prioritizing a reduction in burdens to providers first and foremost, and we have worked in parallel to engage sector leaders on conceptual designs for future releases while rolling out and stabilizing new functionality. PassPort was first launched in August 2017 to allow vendors to more easily file and update legally required disclosures, removing the need for compilation of dozens or hundreds of pages of paper, which required certification by notaries. After many years, we replaced the Vendor Information Exchange System, also known as Vendex. As providers were required to update filings related to contract actions, they created accounts and submitted information on their principals and organizations to remain in compliance. In turn, agencies use this and other information to execute more efficient background checks, speeding a critical step in the contracting process. Based on nudges from our office, agencies, and advocates, providers also created accounts to prepare for future business with the City of New York. We scaled our approach to supporting the vendor community, establishing a central service desk to respond to routine inquiries and maintaining a range of self-service materials to guide users as they complete various in-system tasks. We took many lessons from our experience with nonprofits and HHS Accelerator, knowing that any current or potential vendor may need a patient and committed person to help demystify government speak, translate requirements into clear actions, and serve as a liaison between agencies and vendors when necessary. Our second major release created a digital catalog for the city's requirements contracts and a system for managing invoicing and payments against those contracts, which reduced the cycle time for ordering from the requirements catalog by 23% and averaged 4 days from invoice approval to payment. There are now over 17,000 vendors with active PassPort accounts in filed status. Vendex transformation was the first quick win for the team, and we used this momentum to establish even stronger relationships with advocates and vendors in all industries. What they all wanted was greater insight into the contracting process, particularly knowing which steps were completed or next, and a predictable experience with solicitations. There was common ground with agency staff who also wanted to standardize and better track processes, which involved oversight partners and vendors. And nearly everyone longed for a digital experience that could be used citywide and not just varied processes based on each agency. The COVID-19 crisis afflicting our city and country since the spring has only further highlighted the need for a fully digital procurement transformation. While many agencies and vendors experienced disruptions to their normal operations, PassPort allowed for some continuity and rapid support for essential service providers. It became apparent that activities such as submitting electronic documentation rather than stacks of paper, removing notary requirements, and accepting e-signatures instead of wet signatures would be required to support a digital socially distanced procurement approach that limits in-person interactions. Our most recent release of PassPort has brought this vision to reality. Release 3 provides functionality for a fully digital end-to-end procurement process, starting from requisition all the way to contract registration. It allows agency and vendor users to manage contract amendments and change orders while utilizing digital signatures to replace wet signatures. This system release was accompanied by a major change management effort. We have created dozens of user materials, including manuals, quick guides, videos, webinars, and courses to guide each discrete task vendors and agencies must complete across different procurement methods. Along with that, our service desk has responded to thousands of inquiries seeking assistance with initial setup and other activities in PassPort since the original go-live date. Our trainings have been attended by over 3,000 participants just among agency procurement staff, and we have hosted over 500 representatives from different organizations at vendor-facing training sessions. Recognizing the need to put everything in a digital format, we have recorded these trainings and made them available as needed for system users through multiple different channels. Through this project, we have found that users often prefer a self-guided learning approach, so we direct resources toward important high-volume tasks so users can become familiar with the system at their own pace. In parallel, we are leveraging PassPort and other tools to enhance public transparency into city contracting. As you remember, we launched the public access terminal at our office earlier this year, along with Councilmember Kallos, which provides information on city contracts, vendors, and other procurement data to supplement what is already available in the public sphere through sources like Checkbook. This information is also available on our website under the public reporting section of the PassPort page on our website, www.nyc.gov/mocs. Our data shows that these resources have been downloaded hundreds of times this year, demonstrating the value of providing public accessibility to the spending of taxpayer dollars. We will continue to look at new ways to enhance the publicly available procurement data set as we move further with PassPort implementation. While Release 3 has hosted a range of different procurement types, our onboarding strategy has placed a particular emphasis on making sure that MWBE and small nonprofits are prioritized for support in the early stages of the system's release. Our staff worked closely with agencies to ensure that these procurements were properly configured and prioritized for early deployment in the system, and the associated vendor pools were aware of how to find and respond to these solicitations. For council discretionary contracts, we undertook a major process improvement to bundle these awards into single contracts per provider, reducing the contract volume by about 2/3. After the August and September transparency resolutions, we bulk uploaded roughly 1,700 discretionary contracts into PassPort. Agencies and providers are currently in the process of moving toward registration, with many vendors working through document submission and approval. The decision to prioritize these areas of procurement reflect MOC's ongoing commitment to level the playing field for all entities seeking to do business with the city and make sure the contracting process is accessible to all organizations, no matter their size. While it is still early, we are already seeing promising results. Our vendor and nonprofit communities have provided positive feedback on their ability to move through the contract process in a simplified digital environment, while providing invaluable feedback on specific process pain points we can address through system enhancements or tailored user materials. As we stabilize Release 3 and continue in-flighting contracts from retiring systems, we are also preparing for Release 4. Release 4 primarily brings new financial features into PassPort by adding functionality for invoicing, budget allocation, and payment through interfacing with the city's financial management system. Drawing on lessons we learned from HHS Accelerator, centralizing these tasks creates the opportunity for standardization and additional transparency. With Accelerator, we were able to establish a cost manual for human services providers, standardize invoice guidance, and enhance performance management for financial staff. Just within the last few weeks, we established a new invoicing manual to standardize practices and speed up payments to nonprofits. We hope to expand on these gains for the financial side of city contracting through Release 4. Release 4 will also update and replace the last remaining core functionality that PassPort has not fully addressed, which is pre-qualification management. Pre-qualification management under Release 4 will shift the existing process from HHS Accelerator into PassPort, in keeping with our longstanding goal to centralize major contracting tasks in one place. Overall, this last major release brings the complete end-to-end process for citywide contracting from requisition to payment into a centralized digital location, while featuring new in-kind tools for citywide procurement staff. With regard to the bill before us, Intro 1627, we are happy to see that our goals align with those of the City Council. PassPort promotes transparency, timeliness of contract registration, and a preference for digital solutions, and builds on successes we have seen with early releases and Accelerator. By fully digitizing the contracting process and making milestones visible to all parties, we hope to build a more timely contract registration process through greater clarity on process requirements for all parties. If data indicates a need for us to move faster in certain areas, we absolutely should. And we must establish realistic targets related to each procurement so we can start contracts on time. MOX is committed to making timeliness data readily available to all relevant parties for a given contract and reporting on aggregate performance. We believe full digitization and its associated transparency will bring improved timeliness to city procurement, and we look forward to sharing those results. However, we are very concerned with Intro 1627's proposal for setting timelines for each step of the procurement process and for the oversight review that each agency charged with oversight must undertake. Procurements vary in scope and complexity, and we do not want to disadvantage our negotiating position nor reduce the rigor associated with due diligence steps. Establishing set timetables could interfere with the work of agencies charged with oversight of the contracting agency. Some contracts are lengthy and complex, requiring significantly more time to review than other more straightforward ones. At times, contractors propose terms that are unacceptable and thus require significant renegotiation in order to obtain the best possible result for the city, requiring additional time beyond the oversight agency's control. Moreover, if the oversight agency identifies an issue that needs to be fixed by the contracting agency, that can also prolong review of the contract. For these reasons, limiting the oversight agency's time to review may be counterproductive and could compromise its ability to thoroughly analyze and review complicated contracts or address unforeseen problems. Overall, the PassPort project will remain critical to achieving our goals of bringing greater transparency, timeliness, and integrity to citywide procurement. As the city continues to respond to the COVID-19 crisis, it is more important than ever that we maximize use of fully digital solutions, ease the burden for our human services sector, and put equity at the heart of the recovery. Consistent with this approach, we rolled out the biggest release of PassPort yet, with a heavy focus on getting MWBEs and small nonprofits successfully onboarded first, with promising results so far. Leveling the playing field and making it easier for anyone to do business with the city is at the heart of what we do at MOX, and we are pleased to see the attention this major initiative has received. I look forward to sharing further results as we continue with digital transformation. I am joined by First Deputy Director Ryan Murray, General Counsel Victor Olds, and Deputy Director Aaron Valeri. We would be happy to take any questions you have at this time.
Thank you, Director Simon. I'll now turn it over to questions from the chair. Panelists from the administration, please stay unmuted if possible during this question and answer period. And a reminder to Chair Kallos that you will be in control of muting and unmuting yourself during this period. Chair Kallos, please begin.
Thank you. We've been joined by Councilmember Barron. I'm going to ask if any committee members have questions, if they want to raise their hand. I'm going to turn it over to former Chair Rosenthal to ask questions about her legislation, and then I'll begin chair questions.
Thank you so much, Chair Kallos. And needless to say, I'm about to have to go back to do something on my other committee, but so I'm going to, actually, if it's all right with you, I'm going to do that first, and I'll be back and indicate to you that I'm back in about 3 minutes.
No
Thank
problem.
you so much for your patience.
My pleasure. We are working on the art of being in 2 places and 2 Zooms at once. I want to thank you for your testimony. I also want to thank the Mayor's Office of Contract Services for having this hearing on somewhat short notice. I guess I'd like to just start with a broad overview, which is, so PassPort is now at the release 3 stage. Can you explain where you are in your planned timeline for the complete rollout? When will PassPort be done? And yeah, when will PassPort be done, and how late are we on our rollouts, if at all?
Sure, thank you. I like to say it'll never be done, right? Because being a digital platform, right? Our goal is to constantly adjust and evolve to meet the needs of the procurement process and our stakeholders. So I never want to say it's done, but we do have 4 major releases that were planned. In terms of timeline, release 3, we were hoping to get release 3 out. Our targets were March of 2020, and that sort of went out the window, as you could imagine. Had an impact on, COVID had an impact on everybody, including us as Mox jumped into COVID response. And we wound up going live in June. There's a knock-on effect for release 4. We had originally hoped to go live in January, February of 2021. It's looking more like it will be the spring of 2021. But, we're full steam ahead. There's no distraction, and, our heads down. This is incredibly important for us to get done. But there, so there was some, delays due to COVID, but we are back on track and ready to go with only a couple of months delay.
Usually delays come with cost overruns. How much was initially budgeted for PassPort? How much are we spending, and are we seeing cost overruns on this project?
I'll get you the exact contract dollar value. It's certainly publicly available. I just don't want to say it incorrectly. I don't have it right in front of me. But there have been no cost overruns due to any kind of delays. Every bit of budget that we have on this contract has gone to scope.
In reviewing this this program, we noticed that that while this program appears to be a multi-years project, something that is going to take an entire term to get done, that some of the jobs involved in implementing PassPort have been outsourced. Can you share what was outsourced, why, and whether or not we can use city employees to do the work?
Yeah, so I guess I wouldn't call it outsourced. We contracted out for particular expertise to join the city staff that we have at Mox. The Mox staff has actually grown. The city staff has grown quite significantly over the past few years to support this project. And as I talked about in our testimony, we have a robust learning management as well as change management structure at Mox, and those are all city staff. And when it came to particular expertise that we needed around the technology itself, that we didn't have in-house, we have brought in some partners to work with us on implementation. Obviously, this is a SaaS product, and so we the initial procurement was for an implementator for the work for that particular technology, and so we contracted with a company called Ivalua. Ivalua has a subcontractor, which is Accenture, and they are the systems integrator for the project. But all of the surrounding strategy, change management, learning management, and to a large degree, the technology maintenance is done by city staff.
How much has been spent on Ivalua and Accenture, and why these specific vendors versus less costly options? And then I'm going to turn to Helen Rosenthal.
Okay, sure thing. I'll go quick then. So I got the numbers. Team is working in the background. So it's a 55 million overall budgeted cost, 46 spent to date. And in terms of your question about cost, look, we did an open procurement back, or the city did an open procurement back in 2015, and we chose a proposal that was competitive, and it was in the best interest of the city. I know questions have been raised. We get this all the time, like, hey, I've got an app on my phone that can do this, really quickly. This is a massive effort with tons of data management and workflow management. It doesn't lend itself to a light tool. So this is heavy work in terms of technology, and we believe that the product we have and the contract we have with Ivalua is in the best interest of the city, and that includes cost.
I'm going to turn it over to Councilmember Rosenthal for her questions relating to legislation or anything else she wishes.
Voting time.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Kallos. I appreciate your patience as I juggle these two hearings. So I guess I have a couple of questions. And I hadn't thought of the ones that Councilmember Kallos, I really appreciate your line of questions here. I think they're critically important, and I look forward to hearing more of the information you get. If I could just get into the nuts and bolts of PassPort for a second. First of all, how long do you think it'll be until it's fully implemented? I know it was probably in your testimony, but if you could tell us again.
Sure. So release 3 just went live in June. We are projected to go live with release 4 in the spring of 2021. And in terms of major releases, that is the end of the major releases. But done, it'll never. And I had answered to Councilmember Kallos, it will never be done because we are constantly iterating on the technology. In fact, we've made hundreds of changes already, enhancements, suggestions from users. We're able to implement fairly quickly. So we've made tons of changes, even to just release 3, which went live in June. So the work will never be done in terms of when is it done. It'll never be done. But release 3 was in June. Release 4 will be in the spring of 2021.
Would you expect that there might be other users besides the human services sector? Do you expect all contracts to go through PassPort?
Yes, all city contracts will go through PassPort. That is the plan. It's already begun.
Yeah, and is that a part of release 4 that by spring 2021 that will be done?
So in terms of contract registration, that is in scope for release 3, and we are in the process of doing that right now. So we are onboarding. So there are all these contracts that are being managed to some extent in existing systems. We have to retire those systems and migrate them over to PassPort. That's what we're in the process of doing. And any new procurements, any new RFPs or bids or anything are now to go through PassPort.
Yeah, I get it. It's a lot. It's a lot. That's why there's so many people working on it and so much money being spent on it. Will NYCHA be a part of this, or DOE, or SCA, or H&H?
So yes to DOE. no to SCA, NYCHA, and H&H. There are no plans for them to be using PassPort.
Is HPD, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, they do use PassPort from time to time for background checks on their vendors. So they're not integrated into the full process, but they do have access to the disclosed, what used to be called Vendex, that part of the system. They do access that for, background check type information.
Oh, that's great. All the non-city agencies.
Yeah, it's not necessarily part of their routine business, but from time to time they will access the system to look at a particular vendor.
How about the contract work that HPD does for building housing?
So we've been working with HPD from the very beginning, and they're in the family here. Great.
What would you, given, I'm sorry, and I apologize, I'm all over the place. So I really appreciate you, Director Simon, as always. What would you think about having two different buckets? I'm going to get to this point of having real timelines that most vendors could count on. Would it be possible to have two buckets of vendors, one that can count on a timeline and one that would be in the bucket of need more variability because of the concerns you raised in your testimony, so that the city could be assured, or vendors could be assured? I'm going to hazard a guess, more than 90% of contracts could be, we could know they're going to go through the system within a very short amount of time. And I'm guessing that new projects, new vendors, complicated contracts.
Time expired.
Might take a little more time.
Please take as much time as you need. I'm on a third hearing.
Finally, this bill would require more.
Thank you. So, Director Simon?
The two buckets.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear. Yeah,
so,
the two buckets. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So again, I think we are completely aligned on what we want to achieve, which is speed. I think, to answer your question about two buckets, that sounds like a lot of complexity that would need to be thought out. So just thinking off the cuff, that sounds like adding complexity to a system that we're trying to simplify. But I think the goals that we have for ourselves, which is identifying at the micro level how long things take, and trying to assess for the first time exceptions, right? We think that we can go extremely fast. And so to pick an arbitrary time frame by which something has to happen, I talked about this when this came up in charter revision, is that the best way to ensure that something takes 30 days is to put a 30-day clock on it. And if something can take 1 day, or even something we can do in minutes or hours, we want to try to achieve that as well. You're absolutely right. Good guess. 90+% of things are routine and should move through quickly, and those exception cases should be worked on appropriately. But sometimes it's difficult to know what those things are because they all look the same. And that's sort of, I guess, I'm struggling with the two bucket concept, but I'm happy to talk about it more and think about it more, because everything looks the same at the beginning, and you sort of don't know. So what we want to do is, for the first time, have really reliable data on how long things are taking, right? Which is something we have with HHS Accelerator and invoices right now, and start putting out policies that establish acceptable timeframes, right? Accelerator we knew when an invoice came in, when it was approved, if it was returned, when it was returned, how long the vendor took to respond, the provider took to respond, then on the payment task, how long that took each step of the way, right? And we've got that down to, you know, decimal points of hours, right? And can assess what it looks like, broadly speaking. We know the mean, median, and mode of all of that data now. And Erin will talk more about this later, hopefully. We've now put out an invoice policy that establishes goals for nonprofits to submit invoices by a certain date, and then agencies taking action on those invoices by a certain, if vendor is X, it's X plus 3 days or whatever it is, right? And the policy is on our website, and we can share more about that. But we could never have done that or enforced it without a baseline digital platform with where this data spoke to us. And so that's what we're trying to achieve with PassPort on the macro level across the entire procurement system, is to be able to look at how long things take, where we have, we have to be able to identify issues that agencies are having. Are they exceptions? Do we need to spend more time with particular staff at agencies? Do we need to, agencies as a whole, how do we identify problems? Right now, it's only anecdotal for the most part, right? We hear that something's taking too long, and so we run to that fire and try to address it and fix and help, and that's what we do for nonprofits all the time. But what we need more of is having the process mapped out, putting the whole process in a fishbowl. Everyone sees where everything is going and on what time frames, and then we can start implementing policies to set targets for time frames, and setting those ahead of time with
No. Fair.
Yeah.
That's a fair point. I wouldn't want it any other way. Right. So I would put that aside. I mean, there's no doubt this would have to be based on data and on achievable goals. It would be silly to do otherwise. Again, the guiding philosophy is, how do these vendors that are on the human services side doing so much for us every day, and if I could take an jab just for 1 second, we worked so hard over the years just to get them paid for all the time they have to invest in getting these contracts signed. We got a commitment from the administration to pay for that, and the administration reneged, right? So those are the indirect costs. And it puts the onus on you even more, because if we're not going to pay providers for all the work it takes, extra work it takes for a bunch of things, but including getting these contracts signed and processed, the onus really falls on you to get it right and get it done quickly.
Yeah, I don't want to redo the last hearing, and so I hear you, and I'm listening. We're always listening. I think our focus has always been at Mox on keeping the human services sector strong, and that includes getting them paid on time. Not only getting paid on time, but obviously a related issue is getting their contracts registered on time, and that's why the invoicing policy is out there. If we have registered contracts, we have to commit to paying them faster. Okay, sorry. And so, back in the spring, with the hell that the city went through in March and April, one of the first things we did a tremendous push to issue budget advances to the nonprofit sector. We pushed, in a matter of weeks, we pushed $750 million out to the to the nonprofits through their budgets. And for contract registration, as you know, there are many contract actions that get registered for July 1. for the second year in a row, we were able to reach outstanding goals in getting those contracts registered so that we could issue advances in early July. As you know, we issue 3-month advances on nonprofit contracts in July so that they have cash flow for the first 3 months and improves their cash position as the fiscal year moves on. And so for the second year in a row, despite COVID and everything that was going on, and we worked with the controller's office, and they were very helpful back in the spring to work on human services contracts and get them registered on time so that we could get the money out the door. And so I think our focus is on supporting them as much as we can. That is what we think of when we're trying to improve the procurement process. We started with small nonprofits, which the city council funds, making sure that are hardest to reach and the ones that will struggle the most with dealing with a city contract. We wanted to make sure we got to them first, and so we feel comfortable with our approach, but always willing to hear more and about how we can improve, and we'll do that always.
Sure. I appreciate that, and I appreciate where you're going on this. And I'd also like to get it back to the chair because I know he has a lot of questions. Just really quickly, this is minutia, but you've got now over 17,000 vendors with active PassPort accounts. Are they fully into phase 3? They're fully what does active mean?
So active is active means that they have come in and they've created an account and they filed their disclosure. So they've done the Vendex process, what used to be the Vendex process. That means we've got 17,000 vendors that are ready to go, ready to compete, respond to RFPs. So they're in the system, they have accounts, and so they're ready to go. Their contract is in the process potentially of migrating into PassPort. So maybe some of them have stuff in there and some not yet. So it's a mixed bag, but everyone is sort of set up and ready to go.
And again, this sort of gets to the 2 buckets idea, so forgive me. But of the 17,000, could we safely say all of our routine, I'm not talking about some vendor out there who you don't know about, so how could you know about them? But the people the organizations that we usually contract with, do you think all of them are in that bucket of 17,000? Okay.
Yes.
And where are you the city, in training all of the agency staff in knowing how to use PassPort? So these are the agency contract specialists who I'm sure have had to undergo lots of retraining. This is new, this is different. And I'm sure there are always people who can be retrained and new hires, but forgive me for asking this in such a vague way, but if you could be as precise as possible, how's that going?
Sure. I'm gonna kick that over to Ryan to take, who leads a lot of our change management efforts.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Hi, Chair Emeritus Rosenthal. How are you?
It's always great to see you.
Same. So our numbers remain similar to what we've reported in the past. Over 3,000 agency staff. Even before we launched, we're engaged in learning about the platform, giving feedback, and helping us to get to the starting point, whether that was the first release or the most recent. What we found, particularly with agencies, is the initial training and making sure we have resources available. That's honestly just the first step. To your point, the retraining and the ongoing reinforcement happens at the managerial level. It happens at every single action. So in addition to implementing our self-service model and convening people, we obviously had to go digital during the summer as we were launching, right? So we moved from a lot of our in-person training to webinars and one-on-ones with agencies. But most importantly, I think now, agencies have access to all those materials so they can beef up. We've put a platform in place that we're now rolling out to make sure that they have basic procurement knowledge. And our agency teams are organized in such a way that, and you'd be familiar with this, by task force, so thinking of social services and infrastructure and everybody else who has general procurements, we have our teams organized to have a point person for each agency. And as procurements are being planned, not even just released, planned, our agency teams are right there with them, moving them through every step. We're talking about screen shares along the way, right, to make sure that if anything is still confusing, we can get there. And that's happening both on the procurement side, in terms of getting a solicitation out the door, as well as the contracting side. So this is, you're at the award stage and you need to click a few buttons to get stuff out to the vendors. In addition to that, obviously, vendors continue to be, frankly, very self-reliant in using our platforms. And for those who aren't, we take in those requests. We had some 30,000, we call them tickets, but that's really an interaction. Somebody saying, I need help last calendar year. And we make sure that our teams are also positioned to thinking about the discretionary portfolio. We aren't just saying, let's work with the agency. We set up a process in place where as the agencies are doing their work, we're asking the vendors to also get ready, and they're hand in hand, literally just, I know you're jumping from room to room. That's also the similar thing that we've done. We'd have the agency in one room, and we get the vendor, and then we might put them together so that they can move through those tasks. So ongoing exercise, we've structured ourselves for that hand-holding all along the way, because we found out that that's what's necessary. Vendors tend to be able to do things on their own, however, but the functionality and the workflows are a bit more simplified.
Yeah, I'm less worried about the vendors and more worried about the agency staff in that question.
Sure. You've asked before a question like, so when you find a staff person who still doesn't know what's going on, how do you address that? This model helps us to really escalate those issues and precisely address whether it's the staff person and their manager who needs to pay attention, or it's the overall agency. So we've structured ourselves.
I feel so, thank you. I feel very heard. I really appreciate that. And I just commend you. I was looking for your title, First Deputy Director, Ryan Murray, for your exceptional dedication to this and the outcome. And frankly, Director Simon, that goes for you as well. I know how dedicated you've been to this, and really appreciate all your work. Councilmember Kallos, thank you for giving me this extra time, and thank you for the flexibility with juggling everything. I really appreciate all your work and support on this effort. Thank you.
Thank you for your leadership. I have one follow-up question on Councilmember Rosenthal's bill, which is, I once had oversight over a different mayor's office. It wasn't Mox. They had a different name. It was Mayor's Office of Operations. They call themselves Ops. I call them MOO. But they were responsible for the mayor's management report. And in the mayor's management report, they had indicators. Some of the indicators were a floor, some of them were a ceiling, and some of them were a goal. Would it be possible to work with the bill sponsor and put in perhaps legislation where there was a not to exceed threshold for everything, no matter how horrible or difficult it might be, and a goal, and perhaps buckets, or even just thresholds on contract sizes? It seems like smaller contracts might be easier, bigger contracts, multi-million-dollar contracts might feel, and actually having a goal so that we don't end up in a situation, as you just testified to, where people take the 30 days because they have it. And similarly with tracking and to just see where the agencies are. And I know that the federal courts, I'm an attorney, the federal courts have tracking, and they use that to determine how long cases are. And I remember judges saying to me, you need to get this case settled, or you need to get this case to trial in the next 30 days, because you're making my calendar look bad for the managing judge.
Yeah, look, something like the MMR is absolutely the types of things that we're looking to produce. I just don't, I don't want to put even a not to exceed number out there when we don't know what we have yet, right? But those types of management reports and indicators is exactly what we're trying to produce from what the system tells us, from what the agencies and the vendors' activity in the system tells us. Then we know what our targets could be, or what our not to exceed ought to be, even if egregious. So we're totally with you all in spirit, believe me. And you know, again, the invoice policy with HHS Accelerator isn't a perfect example of what we're trying to achieve, and is what we're hoping to do with PassPort in the future.
Thank you. I'm going to move back to the previous line of questioning. That being said, if there's any council members who wish to raise their hand to ask questions, I'm happy to defer.
Doesn't look like there are, Chair. Just you.
We've been asked talking a little bit about on-time payments. When I came in as chair of the contracts committee, that's something that I prioritized. And working with you, we got, I think, some results. Can you just share some of the results we saw on on-time payment back in 2019 and what changes you were able to make, and particularly whether or not PassPort will assist with this?
Yeah, I'm gonna turn to Erin, who can talk more about those efforts and highlight some of the invoice policies as well.
Hi, Chair Kallos. Sorry about that. Having a little difficulty with my mute button. Thank you for the question. I'm actually excited to share some of the work we've done with the invoicing policy, and a lot of what has been talked about here is actually why I came to Mox in the first place, because I'm excited about creating rational standard policies so that vendors, and especially coming from a background of working in the Health and Human Service agencies, the providers really know what to expect, right? They have an expectation of what's going to happen and in what reasonable time frame, exceptions aside. And you know, it's interesting that discussion about the two buckets and the 90%, because during the pandemic, what we quickly did was spin up some of these engagements that I think Councilmember Rosenthal was really alluding to, which was how do we ensure that the agency staff that are actually carrying out these policies understand what they're doing and where they should spend their time so that we can get those payments out the door. And so we started monitoring some of the data that we have available in Accelerator. And what we've noted is that if we monitor the overall activity, what we're seeing, just as an example, we ran some numbers on the 12th of December. From July 1st, there have been over 23,000 invoices submitted in Accelerator. Over 90% of those have been approved and executed for payment. And so that's $1.7 billion since 7/1. And the remaining 10%, we put in an action list that we distribute to the Health and Human Service agencies so they can focus on those invoices that are aging or aged. And so what we're trying to do here is build a practice around performance management, understanding where we are, constantly iterating to improve, and creating the data tools necessary for agencies to act. And so that's some of what we've been doing. And what the invoice policy does is it creates those expectations for the provider community as well. And so we have a practice that we can standardize and then continue to engage with both the vendors and the agencies to improve over time and iterate. And so we're constantly looking to establish a performance management practice, which I think is the larger goal.
If somebody is watching at home or online and they're saying to themselves, I didn't get paid on time, I'm upset with what they are saying, I know that they can email me, contracts@benkallos.com, and I'll do my best to get them paid. Where can they email, whether they're dealing with an agency or somebody else? Who can they email? Where does the buck stop? Who can they email to make sure that they get paid on time?
My email address is dan.simon@mox.nyc.gov.
Looks like the chair's frozen. Oh, Chair Kallos, are you back?
I'm back. It was really scary to see all of you freeze. It's just like, great, my internet dropped. So I'm not sure if I heard an answer, but I was looking for another email address. I'm glad that the director gave out his personal email address.
I've done it before. Nonprofits know my email address. They know how to get in touch with me. They know how to get in touch with Erin. And if there are any issues, they should escalate to me, and we can, help intervene.
What is the other address if they're not ready to bring it to you, but they want just assistance?
Yeah, I mean, everyone knows help@mox.nyc.gov is our central help desk, service desk that we've talked about.
Great. And so along those lines, back in May, I recall, is it true that you actually were working through spreadsheets to try to get everyone in the system and get folks registered so that they could get early payments? And what did the early payments look like in 20?
I assume you're asking about 2021. Erin, do you want to just go through those numbers?
Yeah, sure. That's no problem. And so we had, as you had mentioned, we had been tracking that and working directly with the agencies, and even this year, some of the providers to help them get their documentation in to meet those timeliness goals. And so we are happy to report that as of July 1st, nearly all of the human service agencies met the benchmark of more than 90% of human services contracts with the July 1st start date. And as I mentioned, we had started monitoring this year also budget approvals and invoicing, and it started in the pandemic, and we continued it with the FY21 timeliness initiative. And so we were able to execute over 1,200 advances totaling nearly 500 million just in the first week of July. And that continued to grow, and we continued to monitor that into August and work with the agencies on a weekly basis, sometimes in some cases a daily basis, to keep that going. And again, providing with them with that information, here's what's in your queue, here's what's ready, here's what can go. And again, establishing that practice of performance management.
And so sometimes no good deed goes unpunished. The contracts committee staff has pulled the median time it took for city agencies to complete procurement for competitively sealed bids in 2020 versus fiscal year 2020 versus fiscal year 2019. And it appears that it's slowed down by about 183 days. Is that accurate? Beyond is the explanation the pandemic, and how can PassPort, whether it's revision 3 or revision 4, address those recent changes that we've seen in your performance?
Yeah, I think that those numbers are a reflection of a procurement system that needs reform. And that's what we're doing with PassPort, right? PassPort Release 3, we just went live with in June, and we are now beginning to release all bids and RFPs through the system. The other thing I would say is that speed and the number of days it takes to do a bid or an RFP is not always an indicator of success. I know we've talked about this before, but oftentimes the city has a target date for a start, particularly when it comes to human services. We know when we want the services for that contract to begin. And so success is nailing that date, right? Having a contract registered by that date. And whether the preparation for that contract to be ready on that date takes 3 months, 9 months, or 18 months, doesn't matter. They're all successful if they meet that date. So I just caution using the number of days it takes as an indicator of success. Be that as it may, I am not defending the current procurement process. Bids and RFPs take way too long as well, and that's what we're focused on with PassPort.
I previously chaired a hearing with the Parks Committee where Parks indicated that there's X number of days for one agency, and then there's another set of days for a second agency, and then another set of days for a third agency. And so that the fact that there's just this very long line of agencies touching a lot of procurements was delaying things. What changes what changes have been made? Where have you been able to take what would normally be a 90-day timeline and then overlap it so that 30 days and 60 days happen at the same time? And
Sure.
what time savings has that created for you?
Sure, I appreciate that. So a couple of examples, particularly with our responsibility determinations. PassPort has allowed agencies to share information on vendors, and that has gotten what we believe, again, data is tough in the old way of doing this work, but we believe it was something like 7-8 weeks on average to do a responsibility determination. Now we're down to a week or less because of this sharing of information. Basically, an agency would do a responsibility determination on vendor X, and the second agency would have to do it completely from scratch themselves because there was no information sharing. And now they get to leverage each other's work, and that has sped up the process significantly. And so something that would used to take 7 weeks is now down to 7 days, give or take, roughly speaking. And those are the kinds of things that we plan to do throughout Release 3 as well. Right now, so for the first time, we now have a system that will lay out all of the different tasks, and where they can be done in parallel, be done in parallel. When they're done manually, only the person with the paper on their desk can do the work, right? And so that leads to a lot of inefficiency. But absolutely, our ability to do work in parallel in a digital space. I mean, this is, as we've talked about before, this is a lot of this stuff is just no-brainers. The system itself will bring a lot of speed, but that does not change the fact that we also need a significant change management effort amongst agencies to meet the system where it is. And that is the other way in which we're addressing this, is by organizing ourselves so that, as Ryan and Aaron were talking about, we have specific teams dedicated to specific agencies, and we're sort of white glove service, concierge service, walking them through each step of the process through PassPort to ensure they know what they need to do and that we're successful in what we're trying to achieve here with bringing efficiency to the procurement process.
With regards to the agencies, and perhaps that may be where the introduction that we were hearing today might be best aimed, but how can PassPort help address ongoing problems at specific agencies? How can we create consequences? So I love concierge, I love white glove, I love carrot versus stick, but how can we incentivize or provide consequences for agencies that continue to delay payments to vendors? And is there a way for PassPort to force agencies to actually inform vendors when and why payments might be late?
So our position on that is that putting the process in a fishbowl, the transparency itself, will move the process along. But we've also given agencies now, for the first time, a tool that allows them to do their work efficiently. And so we expect that to bring speed to the process, that transparency. And, we have no reason to believe why that will not achieve the results that we're looking for. It's worked in Accelerator as an example, right? Our invoice review times are, Erin, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe 6.5 days, and our payment tasks are roughly 2.5 days. That's because that first, we've made it easy for them to do their job. Easy, right? Their job is to review these things to make sure that they are appropriate, right? And that takes time. But in order to memorialize their decision on that particular task, we've made that tremendously easy for them, right? So that's the first thing. And then the transparency that system provides to us and to other stakeholders in the city and to management at these agencies, that's why we're seeing those cycle times. And that's what we intend to do for each step of the procurement process going forward.
Let's talk about that transparency. The city council passes a lot of reporting bills, and there's a lot of reports out there. And even as a council member, I've had difficulty getting my hands on those reports. And I found that when things are public, that means that I, as an elected official, might have access to. And you might be surprised all the nooks and crannies that reports can be hidden in. And so my feeling is you get what you measure. There's an observer effect, whether it's in psychology or in physics. It's actually two different terms, but they actually do both go to the fact that when you observe something, you impact it. And so you have PassPort. Transparency is going to be key. The council does have an oversight responsibility. I also believe in the fourth estate and the fact that the press and the power of the press can help both the council and the executive responsible. And ultimately, I think that empowering nonprofits and those doing business with the city to be able to see what is going on is also particularly important. Also, I believe it is included in some recent laws the council has passed since I've been a council member. How soon what is currently public through the information terminal, what is currently available at the terminal versus on the internet, and I was proud to launch that terminal with you. And when will the city council have oversight access, and how long before the public will have full oversight access?
Sure. So Victor can talk a little bit more about what's available both online and at the terminal. I'll just say that our focus right now is getting everyone that needs to do work on a contract should be able to see the same things and have an understanding of where something is, where it's going next, how long it's been at the step it's on, all of the things that we've talked about over the past few years. And that is what we're delivering. That's what we've delivered with Release 3. We will deliver that with Release 4 as well in terms of the financial aspects. But having a nonprofit log into a system, they have a contract with the city, to be able to understand with granularity where something is, what their responsibility is in those tasks, and what the city's responsibility is in those tasks and how they're doing. So just, I'd love to be able to show folks, and we can do that at potentially a future hearing, but to be able to show you where something is and where it's going next so that they can anticipate what this standard process will bring is what our goal is. And Vic, if you want to be able to just talk more about what's online.
Sure, and good morning, Chair Kallos. We were very happy to unveil the public access terminal with you. And I think that we had the good fortune of also being able to unveil public access online before the pandemic. So now, I guess before the pandemic, vendors would have been able to come in, or really any member of the public would have been able to come into Mox and look up information about who is currently doing business with the city, performance evaluations about those vendors, contracting information. We've now made that information available through our website online. We also work in coordination with, or I guess it's a supplement to Checkbook NYC, which has all registered contracts. So the controller runs that site, but on our site, you can see additional information like performance history for contracts, who the principals are for certain entities, just the information that you would expect to find about who we're doing business with. And that's all available. We update that information on a rolling basis, no less than monthly. So the information is always fresh, and we're happy to be providing that to the public. And thank you again for working through that with us.
And I would add just one thing in terms of the public. In PassPort, we have a public access point where they get to see all of the RFPs and bids that the city is issuing. And so while users of the system have roughly the same screen in PassPort past their login, there's also a public access with no login requirement that they can look at RFPs and bids that are coming from the city.
When we were in physical presence, when people had a point of personal privilege or two hearings, we might recess. At this point, I have another Zoom I need to jump in on, so I'm going to recess for 10 minutes. We will reconvene at 11:28. It is 11:30. I'd like to now bring this hearing out of recess and thank everyone for the indulgence. We were doing a hearing on child's care, and as a parent with a small child, it was particularly important. I want to thank everyone for their indulgence. And once upon a time, this used to be normal to have a brief recess. We will continue. Forgive me, just to follow up, do we have a date certain, or at least whether it will be included as part of release 4, the open and public access and oversight for whether it's the council or reporters or general folks to have access to PassPort?
Yeah, we're happy to work with you and think through the design elements you're thinking about for release 4, which, as we said, is in 2021. I think there might be elements of what you're thinking about that we already have covered. So I'd want to talk about that more, but we can certainly work with release 4 on that.
Thank you. And now that being said, a lot of what council members may be focused on is their discretionary awards and capital contracts. When will the city council, or does the city council already have access to being over to oversee where particular contracts might be, whether it's with a nonprofit providing services to the homeless and youth, or a contract with the Parks Department to rebuild a resilient waterfront or a playground that we need more than ever during this pandemic?
Yeah, thank you. So with your help in the discussions that we've had over the past several months, we've framed out an access within PassPort for the city council. It's built, it's ready to go. We're working with Council Central to help us manage access across all members and their staff. We're excited about this because we think, you folks being the ones that made the funding decisions for these small nonprofits should also have the same access that those vendors and the city agencies do in the development of those contracts. And so we're on the cusp of having that access granted, just going through the machinations of account creation and stuff like that. But it's already built. In terms of, I just want to caution you, it's the city council discretionary. They're not the capital projects that are in there right now, but we can work towards that as a goal.
I would prioritize capital. The expense tends to move, at least since I've been contract chair, the expense projects have been moving more quickly. It is the capital projects that can drag on for years. I will say for my part, I tend to stay on top of my projects and meet with the agencies frequently to keep it on track. I would love if PassPort could do that for me so that I didn't have to meet with them once every couple of months to say, like, where are you in the contracting process?
Yeah, absolutely.
In a lot of your testimony, you've talked about your part of the contracting process and invoicing and just where you've been able to speed things along. You've mentioned registration multiple times. Who does registration? How does registration work? Can you pay people before things are registered? And how can PassPort help get to registration more quickly?
Sure. So the city executes a contract with the vendor. It's between the agency and the vendor. There are all sorts of procedural requirements around a contract. I'm going to skip over a lot of detail, but just get to the broad strokes of this. There's oversight approvals that are required, MOX, the law department, OMB, and then the contract is executed, signed by the city and by the vendor, and then is sent to the controller's office for registration. where the controller has 30 days to register the contract. The way in which we believe that we are going to improve the registration process is a lot of the stuff that I've already talked about, ensuring that the much of the compliance work is accounted for in the system. A lot of what we struggle with in a manual, inefficient process is ensuring that every box is checked, every compliance point is accounted for. A digital system can do that for us and lift us from that burden and allow us to move much quicker. There isn't as much physical looking that needs to occur because the system functionality is ensuring that all sorts of compliance points are taken care of. So that will certainly help from a hours or work hours on the agency side to ensure that a contract is ready for registration and complete. And then obviously, I know the controller's office deals with contracts that might be missing things, even though they exist, they just didn't make its way over in the package. We're working now to ensure that a package won't be able to go over to the controller's office unless all of the requisite pieces are there. And so I think that's going to bring some great efficiency to the process as well.
Thank you. And so I've heard concerns about that things can take a while to get registered at the controller's office. And just to clarify, you believe that some of that delay is because packets that are otherwise complete, the materials just didn't make their way, and that is something you hope to solve?
So I think the legitimate concerns that we have with the registration process are those. We've had some struggles with the registration process in this administration with the controller. I've been on the record about those things before. It hasn't gone well. But what I'm focused on, similar to what Helen Rosenthal, Councilmember Rosenthal was talking about, let's get the 90% of things that should move through in a routine basis, move through on as fast a path as we possibly can. And we can deal with the exceptions as exceptions. So for us, it's, making sure that a contract has every requisite procedural step that it must, that all of the sign-offs are there, that it's executed properly and presented for registration in tip-top shape. That's what we're focused on. That's what we think will bring a great deal of speed, all of the other sort of registration issues aside.
It is good to hear that that hopefully that you're looking at a way to solve the registration issue. We've been looking at local law 63, particularly around when agencies outsource, and they are required to include in their materials when they put out an RFP a disclosure statement. If when they award an RFP, they have to provide certain notices. Is that built into PassPort as part of one of the 3 revisions, and will it be? In terms of mandating that they have fulfilled any requirements they have before outsourcing?
Yeah, I would say that all of the requisite disclosures and procedural steps are laid out in Release 3 for the procurement process, whether it be an RFP bid or any other procurement method.
Thank you. I'd like to focus on the people who matter most in all of this, and perhaps it took too long to get there. For me, it's about nonprofits. For me, it is about businesses owned by women and people of color, where we are trying to do our work on racial and economic equity and gender equity, and creating real opportunities for folks who have faced discrimination and continue to face discrimination to this day. And don't get me wrong, I still want you to pay all the bills, all the corporations and everyone else. But like for me, what keeps me going is the fact that the city's contracts can help bring equity to women and people of color through how we do business. So I guess my first question is, we have a minority and women-owned business enterprise program. And it was created way back in the 90s because we did a study, I think in 01, from a study from the 90s about the city's procurement practices, and that they found a disparity between the number of businesses owned by women and people of color and the contracts they get from the city. And because of that disparity, because of that discrimination that is there, we were able to create a narrowly tailored program to provide them with a preference. And so in conversations with businesses owned by women and people of color, they have shared difficulties with the contracting process. Sometimes it's just incredibly complex for much smaller contracts than a lot of the businesses that quite frankly are run by incumbent businesses that are owned by white men. And so how are we using PassPort to help MWBEs, and what has been their experience if we have already started to help onboard them?
Yeah, thank you for that. So first thing I want to say is that this administration has made unprecedented strides in this area. When back in 2000, fiscal 15, MWB utilization under Local Law 1 was 8%. It is now, in the past 3 fiscal years, we've hit $1 billion, and this most previous fiscal year was 28%. So huge strides. But in no way do we think that that is enough or that we're done. That's why, as we talked about this morning, we put them as our primary customer. We want to make sure that they are the first ones that are comfortable with using the system, so that as opportunities arise, they know how to use the system and how to compete. And so with as well as the advent of the MWBE small purchase method, which allows agencies to make purchases up to $500,000 to MWBEs. We are already using the system, Release 3, to manage those procurements. And we have 167 purchases so far from June to now. There were some in process, and so there have been more than that sort of in play over the summer and the fall. But as we are transitioning to exclusively PassPort for these purchases, we've got 167 that have been released through the system. It requires agencies to solicit quotes from MWBEs, and so MWBEs are logging into the system and submitting quotes in response to these requests. In terms of ease of use, things seem to be going well. What you need to know about me and Vic and Erin and Ryan is we're sort of obsessed with user experience, right? We want this to be as easy as possible. So, when you ask about how's it going, I'm thinking about the 2 or 3 things that we fixed in the past couple of weeks, right? But by and large, everyone's using the system and finding it easy to use and getting their work done. Are there things to improve? Always. But I think by and large, the system has been successful in managing these MWBE small purchase procurements. And so we'll continue to our approach, which is make our best efforts with stakeholder engagement on the design of the system, and then iterate as we go based on, constantly listening to our stakeholders, to our users, and making improvements.
In that answer, you sounded more like a tech entrepreneur, which was my previous job before this, than a bureaucrat. I think that's a good thing. What I will just ask is, so have you gotten feedback from the MWBE vendors, and has it been positive? Has it been negative? How are you accepting feedback from folks who are using it?
In a lot of different ways. Ryan, you can jump in and help me out here. But because we have this concierge approach, we're constantly in touch with our users, right? Personally. And so we're hearing their experience as they're going through it. Our help desk, our central service desk is another way in which we hear feedback. We try to identify areas where we get lots of questions, even though they might be real minor, and it's like, oh, well, the button's over here. You just have to click it. But maybe the button's there, but it's not in a place where their eyes naturally go on the screen. And so we'll adjust that and try to fix it. So we've heard both positive. I wouldn't call it negative. It's just sort of constructive. And I think everyone is, it's universally sort of agreed that this type of thing is sorely needed, right? A digital platform for all this work to be done. It's something the city hasn't had before, so it absolutely makes sense. It's a no-brainer across the board. And so we just constantly listen to where we can make improvements, and we do, and we have been.
If somebody is watching at home right now, they're a woman or person of color who owns a business, who's on the PassPort platform, and they're saying that I had a different experience, there was room for improvement. They can email contracts@benkallos.com. Who should they email at Mox?
help@mox.nyc.gov is still a good central point of contact. But again, my email address is dan.simon@mox.nyc.gov.
I now feel a need to share my email, which is bkallos@council.nyc.gov, and feel free to reach me there. And so the other part is we have nonprofits. It is harder today than it was before. They're dealing with more people who are hungry and need access to food. They're dealing with seniors who need more services today than before, particularly since many are trying to stay home to stay safe. What has the experience been for our nonprofit community? How many have been onboarded? How many are left? And what are you hearing back from our nonprofit community?
So I would say roughly the same. The nonprofit sector has had the benefit of a digital platform for parts of the procurement process, right? RFPs are done through HHS Accelerator. The invoicing is done through HHS Accelerator. And so based on that constant stakeholder engagement, we've developed that tool since 2013 is when we first went live with HHS Accelerator. And so they're in a unique position because they're used to having a digital tool to manage at least parts of it. And so I think the major concern for nonprofits right now is, okay, I've got Accelerator where I do some of the work. Now here comes PassPort. What's going to be the transition? That's absolutely on our minds. And so, their concern, I think rightfully so, is where is all my work going to be done, and how is the transition from Accelerator PassPort going to play out? We are in constant contact with nonprofits, working with them to understand their needs, understand their concerns, and make sure that we're communicating to them in a way that makes this as easy as possible for them. But like I said, our obsession is focused on making sure that this tool is easy to use, and our primary customers are nonprofits and MWBEs right out of the gate. So I think we're on the right track, but obviously always listening.
In speaking to everyone doing business, from MWBEs to even incumbents, I've asked if there are any specific pain points. One example has been that you have to have a notarized IRAN divestment document. Would the mayor's office of contracts be open to putting together a list of all the things that slow things down unnecessarily that could be replaced with, instead of having a IRAN divestment certification from every single thing? Maybe we could just have it done once, and then just a self-certification where the person attests and says, I still am not doing business in Iran. that we could do as a bill for the mayor to try to create more places where we can have timelines run in parallel, or where we can, if there's a place where something still needs to be done in paper, we can bring it online.
Yeah, so nothing's going to be done in paper in the future. We've gone completely digital. The Iran divestment is now, a checkbox before they sign on a proposal, as
Oh,
an
great.
example. So yeah, so we've fixed a lot of those things. Notaries are a thing of the past. Sorry to put notaries out of business, but they're, that's no longer going to be relevant for contracting with in PassPort.
That is good news. We may have additional questions we may provide from our committee and follow up if there's anything that we did not already cover. I have an important question for you. Giants or Jets?
My dog's name is Blue.
Okay, I can't help but oversee a Giants hat in the background. And what do you call it? Would you be surprised to learn that as a young college student, I had the opportunity to do tech for the Giants and may or may not have had Giants blue hair at the time?
Wow. I think we just became best friends.
I will take it. I want to thank you for your time. For those celebrating Hanukkah, please enjoy. For those celebrating Christmas, enjoy, and Kwanzaa and whatever holiday you may be celebrating. Thank you. We will see many of you in the new year. I hereby adjourn this hearing of the Contracts Committee. Thank you.